and then we'll be able to, there we go. And if everybody will mute.
Custom slide. From beginning. Okay. Can folks see my screen? Okay. I'm going to talk about the 20 some years I've been involved with KAC and working with getting books published. The first ones were for my husband, Max. And through the process, I've met a lot of other good writers, and that's why I'm still involved and interested. Max's first book was called The Revival. And when I married him in 1996, he had found someone who had offered to print his book, and he thought it was going to come out any minute. At the time we were married in June, and then it didn't happen, and he was beginning to wonder. He found out that the owner of the company had been doing underhanded things and getting money, and so it was a court decision that anyone whose book had not physically become a printed book would get their rights back, which is what happened with Max. He got everything in the mail, including a copy of the cover and so on. And then it sat in the basement, and he stewed about it because he'd told so many people that the book would be a book. And after we waited for a while, we decided we'd make sure there was a book. And we looked into it. We had this particular book printed by Hall Commercial Printing in North Topeka. And at the time we set it up, I was used to doing that. I'd worked at the Jostens yearbook company and was certainly spent a lot of time getting things ready to be printed. So, but I hadn't gotten a book printed before. At any rate, we had 500 copies printed, and we were very pleased with the quality and so on. And interestingly, a librarian at the Topeka Public Library introduced Max to Don Goldsmith and his wife. We had a supper with them in Topeka, and Don said that he would write a blurb for the revival. He took a copy with him, and his wife called us. I still remember Max being so pleased because she said, Don has decided he's not going to write a blurb, he's going to write an introduction. And so that's exactly what happened. And at the time, so many people had not heard of Max, but they'd certainly heard of Don Goldsmith and his 60 some books he'd published. And so it didn't hurt one bit to have him as the introduction for Max, and that helped. We sold out of the 500 books. We had another 500 printed. We sold out of those. We had another 500 printed. We sold out of those. We ended up having a total of 2,500 books printed. And that last box of books lasted quite some time, but they are down to the last 2 or 3 books. And it was printed in early January of 2001. And by the next year, this particular book had won the J. Donald Coffin Award for the Kansas Authors Club, which pleased Max. And then he had one other book that got the same award. The second book we did was called Tales from Comanche County, and this one also was printed by Hall's Commercial Printing. Both the first book and this book, I specifically chose only 2 colors of ink so that we could use shades of those colors, but that it would be less expensive than having full color, which is 4 different colors of ink, by the way. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and black can make any color of the world. This is particularly brown and dark blue. And it was designed, we bought barcodes, and I knew someone who'd bought a single barcode. I went to that source and they said, we're sorry, but we can only sell 10 at a time. So Dancing Goat Press has used 7 of the 10, and I still have, in theory, 3 left that I could use someday, but have not. We also had a cup of coffee in that town that was settled by the Scandinavians near Lindsberg. Yes, and it was called Dancing Goat Coffee. And Max said, you know, I really like this idea. Maybe we could name our company after that. And I said, well, let me do some research. And I looked into it, and the only other business I found called Dancing Goat was a bookshop in London. And it turned out that they were named after a story about the Middle East, where a goat herder had fallen asleep while tending his goats. He woke up and the goats were gone. When he got to them, he went in search, and he found them dancing under a tree that had coffee beans, and nobody had ever heard of coffee beans. And the goats had eaten some, and it made them high, and they were excited, so they were dancing. He took some coffee beans back to town with him and told a priest about it. And the priest said, that is scandalous. That's against the rules of the Lord. And he threw the coffee beans in a fire, and they roasted, and they smelled so good nobody could resist them. And that's how coffee was discovered. So, interesting story. But we did choose that, and we never had any hassle about naming our company that after doing plenty of research. The next book is one we did for Don Goldsmith. He had a column in the Emporia Gazette called Horsing Around, and he had had a couple of books of his work published prior to this, and since he was involved with us, I told him I'd help him, and this would have been the winter or early spring of 2002. So we did I think 1,000 copies of his book, and can you all see me on the side of the screen? Because I am holding a paperback copy of the book, and he decided he would like to have hardcover copy. So we went back to Hall Commercial Printing. They tore the paper covers off and sent it up to Nebraska, and those people did a hardcover version with silver metallic lettering on the front. So I wanted to show you that it can get complicated and it can happen. Okay. And in all of these cases, I'll mention that I tried to make the type of the title large, tried to make Max's name prominent. This is the 4th book we did, Felicia, These Fish Are Delicious, and it's a series of poems, essays, and short stories. Again, it was done by Hall Commercial Printing, and it was a smaller book in terms of the size of the spine, but it was also done 6 by 9, whereas our other books were 5.5 by 8.5. And this one book, the 1,000 copies we have, was more than enough. And I think it must have been because it was poetry. Because we didn't sell nearly as many as we did with his novels. And when Max died, we gave away copies of Felicia at the funeral. I spoke to several groups after he passed and took copies of that book to give to anyone who attended the meetings, and I still have plenty left. The next book we did was called The Moonbutter Route, and it's about a kid who gets a job, his first job with a local dairy in southeast Kansas, which is known as the Little Balkans area. And Max was fascinated with those people and their heritage of being a lot of immigrants from Europe coming to Kansas and doing what they wanted to do and doing it right. At any rate, Moonbutter Route was very well received. It got one of the first Kansas Notable Book Awards the first year they did that. And then the following year, it got another Coffin Award from the Kansas Writers Group, us. The next book, the fifth book, was done print on demand. And you'll see one major difference between the books I've showed you so far and this one and that's that this one has a full color photograph as part of the cover. And there was no additional cost to do something in full color. So, and it was a glossy cover. I really was excited about using it. You'll notice that I did add a toothpick to the mouth of the owl. The owl was godfather to a baby who didn't speak much English but knew fluent owl, and he'd fly in the window with his buddies and talk with the baby, and the baby was trying to figure out what was going on, and the owls wanted him to decide to be an owl when he grew up. At any rate, I do want to point out to you that on the back cover, I used a photograph of Max as a child wearing diapers. And I thought he showed a great deal of stability, thinking that it would be all right to do that. And the final book of the series, sixth book for Max, was Me and Aunt Izzy. And I photographed the parts of the cover here in our living room with furniture we had, a statue we had, a picture of a flapper that I had. Max's mother used to wear the necklace in the 1920s. The big problem I had is my cat wouldn't get out of the picture. And I took several pictures, but the cat was in every one. But Aunt Izzy in the book had a whole team of cats as pets. So I decided to leave the cat in the picture, and it worked out okay, I guess. um, then we'll get on to some other things. I do a lot of graphic art for a lot of different reasons. This is a couple of posters I did for the Center for Kansas Studies. They have a yearly Kansas speaker on Kansas Day, which is late January each year. In this case, the year it was Craig Miner speaking about hard times come to Kansas. And oftentimes when I'm working with people, I do more than one look for something. And then I show them the choices, and each one is done looking the way it is for a specific reason that I approve of. And if they have a preference, that's what we work with. So in this regard, you can see some things are very much the same. Some things are a little different colored, a little different size. Certainly the main visual is different between the two. And you may have a favorite of the two. I think that they chose this one. When I was showing this to my friend Marvin, he said he liked this one better. So it sort of depends. This is a logo that I did for another group I've been involved with, the Kansas Silent Film Festival, that's been going since 1996 or 97, I guess it was. And this year would have been our 25th annual, because in 2020 we had our 24th. But this year, because of the COVID problem, we decided that we would do a virtual event. So we left the counting number off, and we want to have another live festival at Washburn University next February and make it the 25th and really celebrate because of that. But this is an example of the drawings I do using a computer, how I can change something over time based on the fact that I use Adobe Products, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. But colors, etc. Now, I get catalogs with books for sale. In this case, I have a Bass Blue catalog and a Daedalus Books catalog, and these are all covers that were featured in one of these And I just pulled a bunch of them together so you can see how there are huge, large variations in sizes of books, in the colors used for books. Many of these books do have full color aspects to them. Not everything is exactly full color, but pretty close. In each case, I want to point out that in general, the name of the book is large and easy to read. And in some cases, the author of the book is the main thing on the page, like P.D. James down here on the bottom level. You know, seeing the author's name, seeing the title of the book is important, and having something to grab attention as the front cover, I feel, is important. And in this day and age, just about everything is done in full color. If we had lots of time, I'd ask your opinion on all of this, but I do hope that you will use the, what's it called, chat to type up questions as they occur to you, and we'll have a response area where I'll try to answer questions from you. This is the first of several books I've done for other people. I don't know how many of you remember Agnes Kazminski. She has passed away, but she is from Switzerland, which the name Yoho comes from Swiss origin. And I really enjoyed knowing her with her Swiss accent. She wrote more than one book. Some of them were memoirs. This particular one was a Christmas story. And I have text that she wrote that she wanted on the back cover. She provided the visuals for both the front and the back, and they were things that were not copyrighted, so I had no trouble using them. And there is not even a white spot here for a barcode. I'm not, she had it printed locally, again, like, I don't know if it was Hall's or not, but this is the basic book that I provided a cover for her. This is one that I did for my friend June Hilbert. She had been a lady wearing high heels to work, and then she married a farmer, and they got involved in a cow-calf operation, and she wrote all kinds of memoir stories about what it was like to transfer into being a farm wife. And she brought me a new pair of high heels, a new pair of boots, asked me, and I took photos of them. Then I went to her house and took a picture of her and her husband in front of a barbed wire fence with cattle behind them, which we used inside the book for part of the about the author stuff at the end. And as I was leaving, I pulled out of their driveway onto a dirt road to head back to town, and a car was coming toward me, really knocking up a pile of dust behind it. And I couldn't resist pulling over, rolling down the window, and taking a picture of it as it came toward me. And June really liked that, and she asked that we use that on the back cover of the book. So oh, and I also took a picture of the cow pie laying in the field. So all of that is important to that. The barbed wire on the cover here is something we found as free clip art available online. And I just grabbed that and used it as part of the cover. Here is a book that I did to help Annette Hope Billings, who is our local poet par excellence lady and a good dear friend of mine. Again, she provided the content for what it says on the back cover, the picture of herself, a drawing of a lion, and it's called Ladybug and Lion Press, and that has to do with her granddaughter and her grandson. And then someone took a photograph of her holding a net with butterflies, and they aren't real butterflies, but they look like they could be in a flower garden. And I just used colors and I tried different colors. She liked the one that was green. That's what we went with. And then the white bar here is for the barcode to fit inside. And here is one of several books I have helped F.C. Appleham hands create the covers for and the insides of. Embrace the Adventure is one where he did a lot of poetry about outdoors and his love of nature. He provided the photographs. He provided the content of what it says on the back cover. And because nature was such an important part of this message, I had to put words over the top, and I hesitated to cover up the nature picture totally just because of words. So I put grayed out boxes with the words on top, but you can still see through the boxes enough to see what is behind in the way of the natural beauty of nature. This is another one that I did for Fred, Love, Smiles, and Tears. In this case, he provided both the artwork for the front cover and the back cover and credited the people who did the work. And the front cover color was a part of what the color of the drawing was. So that became the main color for the entire cover. And it has a sort of a feeling of parchment to it. The back cover is approximately the same color, but it doesn't have the parchment feel. Here's another one of Fred's books, Midnight Musings. And again, he had artwork in mind specifically, and we used what he wanted. And again, because the back cover was very, very colorful, I hesitated to hide too much of it. So again, I used a gradient that you can see through in order to do the wording over the top. And this is the most recent of Fred's books that I've worked with. I believe it's his daughter who did the drawing on the front cover, the little boy and the dog. And he specifically asked me if he could use one of my photographs of my cat sitting in the backyard staring out from behind a batch of flax flowers. And so purple that matched the flowers kind of became a part of the cover, front and back. Again, I'm trying to keep the text of the title strong and large, and the name of the author strong and large. This is something I did within the last year for another friend of Max's, Cynthia Akagi. And she had had serious heart surgery and survived it and did a journal while she was getting better. And she decided that she wanted to do something where part of the book was her work, and then there were blank pages every 2 pages, so that someone who was also experiencing a healing journey could create their own pages and work with their own fighting for life and wellness. And she wanted a soaring eagle on the front, and she provided a photograph of the eagle, but it was in a basically cloudless sky. And when I was working on it, I had this photo I'd taken of a sky that she liked. So we put the eagle on top of the picture I took, and it's soaring among clouds and trees. And this cover, maybe more than any other, had more to say on the back cover than most of the books I've worked with, but we made it fit. And again, we have to leave space for the barcode, even if it isn't a part of what I create. This is something that I worked with Tom Fox Averill at Washburn University on. He worked with Leroy F. Dick, who is from the Cherryvale, Kansas area. Have you heard of the Bender family? They made a movie about it, and it was a horrible tale of how the Benders were along a historic trail between the Kansas City area and parts south, and people who would come along the trail were offered rooms overnight at their house, and they would feed them supper and put them up against this cloth in the room, and someone would, one of the vendors would sneak behind the cloth, get a club, and whack someone in the head from behind and kill them. They'd drop him in a hole in the floor, and people were beginning to wonder how come so many people were disappearing along the trail. And about the time they organized and went out to talk to the vendors about what might be happening, the benders totally disappeared. And what they found was what was left behind, and they found a grave with at least 16 dead bodies in it. So this was printed at Washburn University by their printing concern, and copies were given to various libraries and so on, but it really wasn't done to make money or to sell. So that's the story about that. Now, I want to get to some points that I think about as I'm making covers. The first thing is that when people used to use typewriters, each space on the typewriter was approximately equal space, so that if a letter was really thin, it took very little of the space provided for that letter. If it was an M or a wide letter, a W, it would be very pressed to fit in the space. But as a result, the letters didn't really flow smoothly because it was a typewriter. And when you are setting up on a computer or with technology today, each letter has only the space it needs to make the letter fit in. So you can see the second one where the outlines show very thin for the I, wider for the P and the capital C. The words fit together as a unit a little more smoothly. And as a result, I believe things are easier to read because they sit in groups with spaces between them. And I feel very strongly, because we're not using typewriters these days, that after a period, we do not need two spaces. Whereas when you were using a typewriter, because there were greater spaces between the letters in a word, two spaces after a period kind of stood out and helped you find the beginning of the next sentence better. But I don't think that's necessary these days. I do want to point out to you too, that if you have type that is really wide across a page, it gets a little complicated by the time you read to the end of a line to get your eyes spinning back to exactly the right spot at the left of the next line to continue reading. So one thing I always told my students when I taught at Washburn Graphic Arts is to try to limit the width of any text block used for printing to be between about 46 letters and 60. And 46 is twice an alphabet because there are 23 letters, I believe, in the alphabet. Anyway, between 48 or 46 and 60. And the idea here is that it's very much easier to go from the right side and smoothly across to the next line without getting confused. Things can be too wide. I also think that serif versus sans serif. Do you know what serifs are in type? Serifs are the little feet that you see on some text. Both upper and lower case have these little marks at the edges of the letters, and those kind of help tie your eye to the next letter. Sans serif is very crisp and clean, and when you're pushing the letters together is so that eyes don't take up twice as much room as they need, and so on. It's still not difficult to read, but there's something about the fact that when you're doing things in upper and lower case, that things are easier to read because the group of lettering as a group with these things that stick above the line and below the line help you read more quickly and smoothly. We call anything that, this is X height. Anything that doesn't have something above or below the line is in X height, the size an X would take on the page. Whereas some letters have things that extend above the top and others that extend below the bottom, ascenders and descenders. And when things are in groups that have ascenders and descenders in lowercase, it makes it quicker to read than just a bunch of rectangles, which is what all capital letters do. Now, titles, I think, can be in all capitals, but text that you're reading a lot of, I really recommend that you don't do in all capital letters. And one other aspect of that is the spacing between the lines of text. It's called leading. And in some cases, you can have large spaces between lines, which in theory gives your eye a little more room to get back to the left side from the right. But sometimes things can be barely any room at all, or sometimes even minus spaces. I didn't mean to do that, just a minute. So that the P might be hanging down right next to the I. But there could also be a time when if they overlap, the P would cover up the dot on the I. So in general, when we're working with text, we would go a couple of point sizes larger when we're working with small fonts, like 11-point text would have a 13-point leading, 12-point text would have a 14-point leading. But as things get larger, the space needs to be a little larger also. So 14-point averages to 18-point leading, and 18-point would have 24-point leading. So that's something to be concerned with and pay attention to. I'll also mention that I use Adobe Products. They're what I've taught from at Washburn. And because I was an instructor, I could buy them at a discount at the time. I use InDesign for publication design. I use Illustrator when I do drawings and illustrations. I use Photoshop when I'm working with images and photographs. I can make things stronger, brighter, duller, gray it out, do all kinds of things with more lights, more darks, etc. I love all of these products. And then something that isn't really appropriate to worrying about with publishing, unless you're talking about an online, what do they call those things, where people have their little stuff online all the time. Dreamweaver is what I use for web page design. But all of these Adobe products are excellent. And the way it works now is you join and you pay a monthly fee, and you get access to their major products. And every time you open software, you open it from someplace other than on your computer and use it. But each time you open it, you are using their newest product. So everything that's new technology is available to you. It's just that you never stop paying for it. And I have taught all of these software products, but I have not gotten involved in paying a monthly fee for them. I'll also mention that I used to store things. When you have large quantities of books, you have to have a place to put them. And once we had 2 or 3 of Max's novels and one for Don Goldsmith. For a while, we rented storage space, and it didn't take long to discover that it was really hard for us to make a profit when we were spending a lot of money for storage. So we moved everything back to the house, put it in the basement, stored it away, and it's there and it's heavy and it's you know, kind of waiting to you. But doing things print on demand, where you can get 20 books just because you have a need for having some for a signing or whatever, and have them on hand. You store 20 books and then order another 20 as you need them. There's a remarkable difference between that and having 1,000 books stored in your basement. And I am going to stop sharing and find out if there are questions that I can answer.
Thank you very much, Carol. That was an awesome presentation. I am just blown away by how talented the people are in this state, how many stories there are to tell. I mean, even in this district, we just got a boatload of talent. And I love how the first several of Max, of your husband's books were like, you guys must have been the forerunners of branding, because the looks of his books were branded. I mean, such a unique look for those covers. They were just awesome. Does anyone have questions for Carol?
Or comments?
First of all, Carol, thank you very, very much. Your talent is so evident, and it's great to hear more about this. I actually worked at Jostens. I don't know if we were overlapping there or not, but what would be, if one were to go out on the open market as an author, what would be some pricing that one would pay to get a design for a cover? Rough range. Any rough figures?
Well, I usually charge by the hour, and I try to be open and honest and give people a discount. I do newsletters, I do book covers, etc. And if I work 4 hours, I may charge 2.5 or 3. If I work, but also I want to say one thing, and that is that when I am not a word editor. I work with things to make them fit in space. And therefore, the person who is using help from someone like me or someone like me who is not an editor per se needs to have an editor look at everything and be sure that it says exactly what they want it to say before they send it my way. Well, the thing that bugs me the most is when I make things fit in a space and show it to them, and they find all this stuff that needs editing and changing, and suddenly what was fitting in the space isn't the same thing to fit anymore, and then it's double the work to redo it. So my advice is to get a book editor, look at things, make sure you very carefully, even in a Word document, have looked through it carefully, and have what you want before you send it to someone like myself to work with, because our job is to make it fit in the space and look nice.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dwayne, you had a question.
I'm wondering, Carol, what your wisdom is on graphics bleeding off the page in this digital age. Is it maybe not as difficult as it once was?
Usually I worked with Create Space when we first got involved with printing on demand, and that's gone now. It's now Adobe, let's see, I wrote this down just
Kindle
a minute.
Direct Printing.
It's what?
KDP or something like that. KDP.
KDP.
Kindle Direct Publishing.
Yeah, Kindle Direct.
And everything they do is very professional, and they tell you, you pick the size of the book, they ask how many pages, then they give you a spine width. They tell you where the barcode's going to have to fit on the back cover, and you send them things. If there's a problem, they'll get back with you and tell you exactly what's wrong so that it can be fixed, so it will work with their needs. And I just really, one thing I loved about Create Space right at the beginning is you could dial a number, and they would call you back within about 20 seconds and you'd be talking to a human. And that was fantastic. And these days with Kindle, you send them a file, a PDF file via InDesign or whatever, and they put it in format where you can literally flip pages and look at the way everything flows into the space and determine whether you've got a problem or not a problem, and you make a correction, send them another PDF file. They process that and send it to you so you can see that everything has been corrected that you had concerns about. And the price per book is basically how much paper and ink you use. And I know, I'll warn you, when Max and I were involved, the cost of producing the book was probably $4.50. And then we discovered that when you consign, the bookstore wants 40%. And if you want to get involved with a company that will deliver your book across the nation, they want a 60% discount on the cover price. So it's very difficult to pay for the book and get it delivered in the whole bit, and store it and so on when you're working with other people. But if you plan your book so that you can have it made for the price of making it, and then have a price on it that will oversee the consignment fee and so on, you're in a much more comfortable situation.
We've
Then you
got several people here that have submitted questions in the chat. First of all, Barbara Waterman Peters says she charges $200 for a cover painting.
Okay.
That's pretty reasonable for original art. Max says, how many people provide their own art and why do they prefer that? How do you determine colors? Where do you come up with all the varying styles of graphics? Let's see, are there additional rules and suggestions for internal graphics? And I will add here that I like, when I'm writing a book, I like to almost start with my cover first, because that motivates me to get the writing done. But that may be different for other people. But so do you need me to repeat any of those questions?
Yes, please.
How many people provide
Yes,
their
please.
own art and why do they prefer that? How do you determine colors? And
Okay.
where do you come up with all the varying style of graphics?
Oftentimes I see the colors as part of the full color image that has been picked to be the focus. And so I pick something that's green because there's greenery behind Annette's hands holding butterflies, etc. But sometimes again, I do 2 or 3 covers with different colors of backgrounds, and someone has a particular favorite. But usually whatever color I come up with is there for a reason, because it's a part of what they've given me to work with. And I was wondering if Fred has anything to say, because he's one that has provided his own artwork for front covers and back covers. How do you make those decisions, Fred?
Primarily, I like the idea of going with the Kindle Direct because I can use my own material. I would say the adventure photos that were on front and back, they were photographs that I'd taken in Arkansas and Colorado. Other ones I have hanging on the walls in my house, which were original material of either my daughter or my grandmother or my grandmother's daughter, my aunt. So primarily, I love the idea of using this natural original work of people who I'm attached to, and it's almost like they get to be a part of my book because I'm using their artwork. And I think it also makes it somewhat simpler in just having the photographs and or the paintings and drawings that I selected, just to send that to Carol, and it just simplifies the process a lot, and you don't have to deal with copyright and all that stuff. And I usually acknowledge the people whose art I use, and I ask their permission, even though they have given it to me or I purchased it and it's hanging on my wall. I find it was just a lot simpler to use things of my own personal library, so to speak, and rather than having to coordinate it with other artists who were